Is MPL Singapore considered the weakest region? You see, MPL stands for Mobile Legends Bang Bang Professional League, and it's a regional tournament where winners in their respective MPLs, for example MPL Indonesia, MPL Philippines, get to represent themselves in the M Series, i.e. the World Tournament. Actually, MPL Singapore is Singapore's first and only esports league. Other esports titles usually would merge Singapore with other regions, usually with Malaysia, and in fact, MPL Singapore was only born because MPL Malaysia Singapore decides to separate around 2021. So compared to other regions, we are actually kinda young. But do you remember 2021? That was when the world was slowly opening up from the pandemic. When we first started MPL Singapore in Season 1, we were faced with loads of health advisory restrictions and logistical blockades. In fact, we only had our first live audience in Season 3, and that was only for the playoffs. Well, eventually opened our doors for live audiences in the regular season, but that was held in a very small venue. In fact, it was held in Zenway Productions' office, and venue rental in Singapore is just way too expensive. Singapore has one of the highest living and operational costs to be able to breathe and eat in Singapore, and lack of viewership aside, it's just very hard for investors to really start believing in esports in Singapore. Because of the lack of investors, a pro player's and a talent salary is usually not sustainable enough. Most pro players or talents usually need to have another full-time job to supplement their income or take advantage while they're studying to pursue this side passion. Unfortunately, our passion is not enough to put food onto the table. But here comes the chicken egg problem. If our pro players aren't able to perform on the world stage, why would the international audience watch MPL Singapore? And if the international audience already doesn't want to watch MPL Singapore, what makes you think MPL Singapore will get local viewership, especially when our numbers are so small? And when the investors see that there's not a lot of viewership, they wouldn't invest. And if they don't invest, would you think pro players will basically waste all their youth to really grind for that small amount of pay, and especially when they don't see a future in Singapore? This is a very tough downward spiral to break out of. There are some attempts. Diablo, the face of MPL Singapore, is currently a full-time pro player in Singapore, and somehow he made it. I remember watching a random community tournament one day where I saw this 13-year-old kid solo carried as a jungler against two well-established MPL Singapore team, and that's crazy. By the way, last I heard about him, he's already quit mlbb, and that's really sad. You see, there's a lot of us really trying our hardest to become the next Kyrie, to become the next Flap TZ. But what is actually stopping us? Is it our skill? When I was talking to Hades, he mentioned that it's a commitment issue. The commitment issue of Singaporeans to train. I mean, yes, a lot of people say that, Singaporeans have to think about school, they have to think about their lifestyle, like what I mentioned. But you could also say the same for the Filipinos and the Indonesians. Before, they can be the next Kyrie, the next Flap TZ, the next Sans, I think they must have been worried about studying or even something else. You see, when I was also speaking with some of the Filipino imports in MPL Singapore, their parents weren't very supportive as well, like how Singaporean parents are. And you know how scary Filipinos' parents can be. So what is it? What's stopping the pro players from actually getting good at the game? Is it the lack of organizational support, or is it the lack of coaches? Which I personally feel that we're really running out of good coaches in Singapore. Let's put the pro players aside for now, and let's talk about the local viewership in MPL Singapore. There are a lot of mlbb casual players everywhere in Singapore. They can play in McDonald's all the way until 3 a.m. and in between lunch breaks in the CBD areas, literally you also have office ladies playing mlbb just to pass their lunch break. So, why aren't they watching MPL Singapore? Is it the lack of publicity? Like they don't know that actually there's an MPL Singapore professional league? And of course, for you guys who usually watch MPL Singapore, why would you watch MPL Singapore when MPL Indonesia has these crazy good teams. MPL PH has, crazy macro skills, and they're always the world champion for some weird reason. And even MPL Malaysia right now has the Ampos Amoy. We're already stepping into our 7th season in MPL Singapore. And we only just achieved our peak viewership of 66,000 last season. By the way, it used to be way worse. It used to be 15,000 in season 3. And yes, that's a massive improvement. But we also have to look at our neighbors, for example, MPL MY, where they achieved 557,000 peak viewership. That's additional 0 right at the back. I really wish that Singaporeans will also start to watch MPL Singapore, because I always ask the question, if not, who else? Who else will watch MPL Singapore if the locals don't watch MPL Singapore? But of course, we have to give you guys a good reason to watch MPL Singapore. Unfortunately, that falls on the shoulders of our pro players once again. We need that Joseph Schooling effect. We need to win an M series for the locals to actually start caring about MPL Singapore. And I don't see us winning any M series as of now, because MPL PH is really too strong. Well, MPL Singapore, technically speaking, is taking its baby steps right now, even though we are in Season 7. But are we growing? I would say yes. Last season, we hit our peak viewership, and we have been steadily growing since Season 3. We have players that start to step up for the challenge and become internationally recognized on the world stage. And loads of us behind the scene, the producers, the talents, have been working tirelessly to deliver that entertainment for those who are watching MPL Singapore. And all I ask is local viewers, local Singaporean viewers, to give us a chance. Because, as I said earlier, if Singaporeans don't watch MPL Singapore, who else? Speaking of Season 7, trust me, Season 7 is going to be super hyped, because there's lots of uncertainties right now, which means there's a lot more opportunities open for new teams, or new players, new talents to really step up onto the world stage. Don't forget, RSG SG has lost so many of their key players. Diablo has switched over to Team Flash. RSG Bray, facing the biggest threat of all esports players in Singapore, and that is mandatory national service. Don't forget Bleed Esports, which also started importing Filipino players and also Filipino coaches into their fold, and they're looking to spice up that competition. I know I've been repeating this over and over again at the start of each season, where I say that, this season's going to be new, this season's going to be fresh. But this time around, it's slightly different, because if you guys are just joining us for the first time in Season 7, hey, don't worry, you haven't missed much. But you'll be doing Singaporean talents a loads of favor, because you finally will give them a reason to care. You finally give them a reason to really fight for that slot in the M series, especially when their passion, their hard work has been gone unnoticed for 7 seasons as they fight towards that slot in the upcoming MSC, which is like a world stage, and that whopping prize pool of $3 million. So, is MPL Singapore the weakest MPL region? The only thing I have to say is that definitely the pro players have a lot of things to prove the doubters wrong, to win the viewership, and on top of that, with your viewership, with your help, finally, you give them a reason to fight and to prove the doubters wrong. With that, stay tuned for MPL Singapore Season 7. Until next time.